Welcome to the world's greatest health show. My name is Shawn Buckley with the Natural Health Product Protection Association, and I'm very pleased to be here with regulatory consultant Bruce Dales. Bruce, welcome to the health show.
Well, thank you very much for having me here, Shawn. It's awesome to talk to you. We've at times been through a lot together, but arguably it's given me some gray hairs, but it's been extraordinarily educational and informative and fun. So hopefully we won't stop doing that too.
I'm going to try to introduce you. And so I went back into, my archived files and pulled out a court affidavit where you were qualified as a court expert. And I will say to the audience, so I practiced as a lawyer for 30 years in the area of drug regulation. And when I'm in court against Health Canada, there are really only two experts that I came across, regulatory consultants, that I actually could get qualified as experts in court. You really have to be able to demonstrate you're an expert. I have to be able to demonstrate the person's an expert to get them qualified. It's quite a burden. And Bruce Dales is one of the two that I was always comfortable I could get qualified, and the courts would agree, oh yeah, no, I will listen to you as an expert. So Bruce, I went to an affidavit, and I'm just cherry picking here. So just, for time, because I'm not having to qualify you as an expert, but I want people to understand when we have this conversation that you've got a lot of history. So skipping ahead, in 1993 to 1998, you were the person in charge of regulatory compliance for a natural health product company called Flora.
That's correct, yeah.
In 1998, you went out on your own and you started Dales Product Development and Regulatory Specialist. I don't know if that's what you're still called. I think of you as Dales Consulting, but
in a nutshell, yeah. That's an extremely succinct and accurate depiction of my background. That's correct.
Okay, no, we haven't even got there. I'm just saying, since 1998, you've been a regulatory consultant, running your own business, helping companies navigate the regulations, and particularly natural health product companies getting licensing, product licensing and site licensing. In 1998, you were approached from the Directorate of Health Canada, the Therapeutic Products Directorate, to actually form a liaison committee of, industry members to basically kind of be a liaison with Health Canada. Like, we're going way back here. In 1998, you were approached to form a committee to basically have industry members give Health Canada feedback on things, because we all knew we were in a transition period then, with things being referred to the Standing Committee of Health. Another organization that approached you was the National Institutes of Health in the United States, asked you to join a panel of 120 experts worldwide to assist them with protocols to help incorporate natural remedies as cancer treatments.
That's correct, yeah.
Okay, and I'm just cherry picking here, but you also you were approached by the Russian Ministry of Health to help them develop their new drug approval process.
That's not quite accurate that way. What really happened was the Russians approached us to develop some new drugs, to go through a new drug process, and they had specific protocol in order to further develop certain natural products into a new drug process. So I work with them on that. Yeah.
Right, but actually helping them with their processes.
Yeah.
So you were basically helping them redefine the regulatory process to help incorporate natural health products through their new drug approval process.
Yeah, that's fairly accurate. Yeah.
Okay. Well, and then 2002 to 2004, you taught students doing research and development on directed studies at the British Columbia Institute of Technology.
That's correct, yeah.
I've already shared that, as a lawyer that had to have regulatory experts, your you're one of two that I'm aware of regularly being qualified. And and in reality, there aren't very many experts out there that actually have the background and have the horsepower to be qualified in court as an expert. And most importantly, what makes you the most qualified is you're the first person I call when I have to go, what the heck? What do you think? Right? There's this happening. What's going on here? So, and we've had conversations for decades on regulatory issues with natural health products and drugs.
Yeah, that's correct. And I compliment you too, Shawn, on being constantly on the natural health product company's side, um, under ethical situations, of course, and backing them in regards to fair and equitable treatment with Health Canada.
Right. Well, thank you, Bruce. And I want to go a whole bunch of places, but one of the things that Canadians watching this might have no idea about is they may not even understand that in a way our government funded medical system is gamed. And what I mean by that is if you go to the mainstream medical system to get treated, and I appreciate in the odd province there might be the odd exception, but by and large it is illegal to treat health conditions in Canada with anything but chemical drugs that had a patent, which is why the government funded medical system will only offer you synthetic drugs that had a patent. Did you want to share with, like, how does that work? How is it that the only legal treatments used in our government funded healthcare system are synthetic chemicals? Because the reality is you and I know actually natural health products, especially for chronic illness, like they're way more effective. So how is it that we've limited ourselves to chemical drugs?
Well, I'm going to touch on a couple of topics here, and the audience is going to have to, I hope, will bear with me because I am getting to answer your question. I am answering it, but the question is not simple and straightforward. So I'm going to bring up a couple of issues here. And the first one is regarding money and taxes. Okay. And when we talk about that, what I'm talking about is that the system is gamed, in my opinion, to have an advantage for the pharmaceutical industry. And now, what happens lately is the pharmaceutical industry or the Health Canada is claiming, hey, look, we have to charge user fees for natural health products to have them registered. And we do that for pharmaceuticals already. And that's correct. However, what they don't mention is that the other taxes that these compounds are charged, which makes them problematic on the market as it is. For example, import duties, they pay higher import duties to get on the market. The markups at pharmacies are much higher for natural health products than they are for prescription drugs. In other words, for my understanding, for a pharmacy on a prescription drug, if they're paying $100 for that prescription drug, they're basically allowed to charge the dispensing fee only. And if it's a patented drug still under patent, the government already sets the price for that drug, so the pharmacy doesn't bring them down in price or anything, or they can't negotiate a different price. On natural health products, the markup of the products is higher. On natural health products, the import duty is higher. Plus, what happens is that within the pharmacy itself, the prescription drug a lot of this time is covered by the government. So in other words, they get a prescription at the pharmacy, they take home the diabetes drug or whatever, and they can either recoup it a lot of the time on their taxes, or it's fully covered by the government. So that's one of the first issues here.
Well, there's sales tax too.
Well, there's, the GST. You're absolutely correct. That's a very good point in the fact that there's GST on these products as
Natural health
opposed
products.
to there's no GST on the prescription drugs. So it's true, we're not paying the user fees to the government, but what's also true is we're paying a lot of other taxes, a lot more taxes, and also to review these medicines, they're not, um, they don't take the same amount of time to review. So we have one dagger in our back right there for natural health products. The second dagger, I would argue, would be the enforcement fairness and reliability of Health Canada. So within the enforcement itself, the reliability is not good. In other words, from what I've seen, Health Canada, their enforcement practices for these companies, as bizarre as it sounds, is based on what they receive in the mail. I mean, this sounds strange, but they will not look at one company that's a natural health product company and have some sort of proper assessment on the safety of that compared to what else is on the market. So when they don't have a proper assessment, they spend all their time going after one company that may not be as, it may be much safer than the other options on the market, but they just focus on one company. And from what I've seen, this is another sword in our back. And from what I've seen, health food stores and pharmacies are specifically.
So can I just unpack that, Bruce?
Yeah.
So like the chemical drugs, the
Yeah.
pharmaceutical drugs, my understanding is like they're extremely dangerous, and they're actually, you know, one of the top 5 leading causes of death. Like it's just chemical drugs taken as directed. And are you aware of, because you've been practicing in this area, my gosh, like over 30 years.
That's
Are
right.
you aware of any credible report of a death caused by a natural health product in Canada?
The only time that natural health products, from what I've seen, cause harm is if they're adulterated or contaminated. If what's on the label is in the bottle and they're made by good manufacturing practices, they're not. I
Right.
haven't
So
seen any problems.
if you're, you know, if you're adulterated, meaning somebody's put a drug in. So just so people
Yeah.
understand, I mean, um, there's some people out there that basically will act criminally, and that's a separate issue. So that's adulteration, and that's a criminal offense. We don't need any regulations for that. We have the criminal law. And then also fraud. So if you're not putting in the bottle what you say is in the bottle, then actually even somebody who's relying on what's in the bottle could be hurt because it's not there. So and we're protected by fraud, and we're also protected against unsanitary manufacturing practices, just in the criminal law part. So is that
But
right?
I'm going to hit you with something here, and that is that I agree for products made in Canada and manufactured in Canada.
You're not aware of a single death.
We're protected, just as you said. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
However, what's interesting is that Health Canada goes after health food stores and pharmacies and these manufacturers from Canada. But if I want to go on the web right now and find something for cancer,
But can I just hold off for a second though? Like let's just talk about the safety about natural health products, because you raised the issue saying there's kind of unequal enforcement, and I'm just wanting to, you know, if you agree, drive home the point. You know, we've got a really risky class of products that by and large seems to be left alone. In Health Canada, when they're going after a natural health product, really because of the mail, meaning somebody's complained, um, doesn't actually, it doesn't mean the product's dangerous or should be a focus. It's just Health Canada's enforcement is based on complaints.
they are, yeah, they
Yeah.
are. And what happens, I would agree with you. In as far as the pharmaceutical industry goes, When they go and approve a new drug, a lot of the time the clinical is not that extensive. In other words, the amount of people in the clinical trial.
Meaning a chemical drug
That's right,
approval.
yeah. So they rely a lot on post-market surveillance. So they rely on the first, I don't know, 10 million people taking the drug to see how safe it is. Now, in the case of, I agree with your point, in the case of peppermint, how many billion people have taken that over time? You know, it's multitude of billions, so we know for sure that's safe. Whereas in the case of a chemical drug, most of them are synthetic analogs. So when the first thing gets first released, we learn over time the true nature of the drug. I'm not saying that they shouldn't release it. I am saying that we have to put it in perspective, in that we really, in my viewpoint, don't know how safe that drug is until it's out for a while and taken by a lot of people.
And I just want to unpack that again and just make sure we finish the other point. But you're basically saying, like, Canadians need to understand, when a chemical drug enters the market, it's usually approved with quite a small clinical trial. Like, they might think there's been all this grand testing, when really we're talking about small numbers for a short period of time. And really we're the guinea pigs, because the safety signal is, well, how many of us are hurt or are not hurt for the first period of time that a chemical drug's on the market. But the point I was trying to make, Bruce, is like, my understanding is the entire natural health product industry. So like, how many products are even on the market now? Like 70,000, 80,000, like, there's a lot of products. The whole natural health product industry is safer than peanut butter.
I trust you. I haven't
Well,
checked
just
the
think
stats,
about it.
but I
Peanut
trust
butter
you.
causes death every year. Are you aware ever of a death caused even by a spiked or adulterated natural health product? Like, I mean, where are the deaths?
Well, when you're talking about adulterated or contaminated products, they do make me nervous. However, you are correct. I completely agree with you. If what's on the label is in the bottle and it's taken as directed by as it is traditionally taken over centuries, and it's manufactured by good manufacturing practices, these products are extraordinarily safe. There's no question. And I don't know any compounds on the natural health product market that are synthetic analogs. And that seems to be where some of the issues lie in safety in some of the synthetic analogs that come out by the pharmaceutical industry. And given after a synthetic analog is out for a while by the pharmaceutical industry, a lot of them are safe and a lot of them are therapeutic, but we find out over time. Within the pharmaceutical industry, they do have to do safety and efficacy studies before the clinical trials on 2 animal species. But what happens in a guinea pig or a rat or a mouse or a rabbit doesn't necessarily happen within a human. And they're not that long, those clinical trials on the mice and the rats and the rabbits either. They're done for a short period of time. So I think your point is well taken. And I think that the thing that is most concerning to me when we're talking about natural health products, the only time I get worried about them isn't when they're manufactured in Canada and under the standards that you're mentioning, Shawn. My concern is if they're imported, if somebody looks online and they're imported from a third world country by third world manufacturing standards, and they're just sent directly to the customer here without any testing. And these people can say anything what they want about the product. They can put anything they want on the label and nothing's really checked on it. So it's interesting to me that Health Canada is threatening and really going after natural health product companies within Canada that go by the standards you're saying, but at the same time, ignore the natural products coming over the border like that, or they don't in my opinion, they don't do a risk-based analysis compared to, as you're talking about, the pharmaceutical industry as well. To me, and I think you mentioned this in your charter, Shawn, that there needs to be a risk-based analysis before taking a product off the market.
I want to get back to the import thing, but before we do, just kind of follow up on one thing you said, that they don't really do a comparison. And remember, not that long ago, Health Canada for quite a period of time took natokinase off the market. So, and so just so that people understand, what we're about to talk about. So natokinase is it's an enzyme derived by a type of soy, and it's widely consumed in, some areas of Japan. And, a number of manufacturers in Canada were providing natokinase. No one was licensed for it. Like, we've now got this licensing requirement, but the manufacturers had submitted licenses. So Health Canada knew, by and large, who was, at least that these people were selling natokinase, because they had applied for a license. They were just waiting. And Health Canada just made this decision. Oh, natokinase is dangerous. Let's just ignore how widely it's consumed everywhere else without any seemingly problem. And let's ignore that no one in Canada had been hurt by natokinase. But, all of a sudden it's dangerous, and they take it off the market. Well, Bruce, when that happened, and I can't talk about who it is, but I'm approached by one of the companies that Health Canada said recall. Because everyone else, when Health Canada ordered them to recall, they recalled. But this company came to me and said, what should we do? Health Canada's asking us to recall. And as a lawyer, I actually have to make sure that my client doesn't hurt anyone. Because it's all fine and good for Health Canada to say, oh, we're ordering you to recall natokinase, which is being used for health purposes. But under the criminal code, Bruce, if you've put a remedy out on the market, regardless of whether it's chemical or natural, and people have come to rely on that remedy, and then you withdraw it without warning, without giving people an opportunity to transition, well, if anyone is hurt or dies, you're now facing charges of criminal negligence, causing death or causing bodily harm. Or, if it's really foreseeable that you would be causing harm, you could be charged with homicide, culpable homicide. So, I mean, when I'm giving the advice to the client, I'm looking at all of the law, not just the Food and Drug Act that Health Canada is looking at. Fortunately, our criminal law requires people, manufacturers of remedies, not to hurt other people. So there's this criminal obligation. So we actually hired a medical doctor who has expertise in risk analysis, who looked at it and said, oh, wait a second, do not recall. Don't do what Health Canada said. And the problem, according to the medical doctor, is there were a lot of healthcare practitioners, including medical doctors, that were actually using natokinase as a blood thinner, as an alternative to like warfarin and Pradaxa and the like. And you have to give them time with their medical practitioner to transition. So what the risk analysis doctor told us to do was just allow the stores to run out of stock. So stop selling. You can stop selling, and immediately courier notices to every health food store, whether you're, that you're of, a notice saying Health Canada is no longer allowing Canadian companies to sell natokinase. So if you are being managed with a healthcare practitioner on natokinase, please consult your practitioner immediately. And oh, by the way, you're perfectly entitled to legally import it from US suppliers, not us. We don't sell in the US. And so we'll get to your import thing, but I just want to deal with this risk analysis thing first, but it'll segue into your import, so that Canadians would know two things. A, consult with your healthcare practitioner that has you on natokinase, and you can buy it from the US. So yeah, you can't buy it in Canada anymore, but you can buy it from the US. No, what was interesting, Bruce, just to your point of Health Canada doesn't compare risks. So here they're taking nattokinase off, and they've let nattokinase back on again. So clearly nattokinase wasn't a risk. But at the exact moment, Bruce, there was Pradaxa was a newer blood thinner, chemical blood thinner on the market. And there wasn't an antidote at the time. So in our mainstream media, the media is reporting that emergency room doctors are complaining. People are showing up at the emergency ward, they're bleeding out with Pradaxa and they don't have an antidote. Like if you were on warfarin, like rat poison, and you showed up at the emergency department and you've taken too much or bleeding out, they give you a shot of vitamin K and you're going to make it. But they didn't have an antidote yet for Pradaxa. My understanding is they do now. Well, Bruce, how many lives were lost because people being safely managed on nattokinase without any side effects by medical doctors had to go on warfarin or Pradaxa because there was no longer a safe alternative. And Health Canada never looks at comparative risk analysis. They never look at the benefits of a natural health product when they attack it, do they?
I completely agree with you. I mean, I have seen absolutely astoundingly poor risk analysis of natural health products. I've seen ones where I'm not joking. If there was a grade 10 science student that submitted that as a weekly assignment for their class, they would get an F. Okay. It's bad enough that I tried to look up the references that they were talking about. They didn't exist. Nothing made sense on it. I completely agree with you. I don't know where their risk analysis are coming from for these products. It's insane, and you may be right. Possibly, you know, there's several options. I mean, possibly they're well-intentioned people that just simply look at new drug trials or new drug submissions and say that's the be-all and the end-all of everything. Of which I don't agree, by the way. I think that there is advantages and disadvantages to new drug submissions, and I have been involved with them before. But I completely agree with you. I don't know where they're coming from in these risk-based analysis. And that includes what we're talking about here when they're attacking Canadian companies for manufacturing products in Canada where they can recall them much easier and they can monitor the safety of them much easier. Why would they take those off the market and say, yeah, bring them, bring the imports in where we can't recall them that easily? And in order to shut down or do a recall, we'd have to check every box at the border. It's insane. I don't get it.
Mm-hmm.
I
So
completely agree with you.
I want to talk about the import thing, but just when we were talking, like you were sharing, you've seen risk analysis from Health Canada that really makes no sense. Like a grade 10 science student, you'd be embarrassed. Can I tell you about the funniest one I ever ran across? And I've been given permission long ago from the client to talk about it. I know that you haven't been given permission, so you're not giving us the examples. But the funniest one I ever had. So, Warm Buddy, it wasn't even a health product. So they had teddy bears with a Velcro opening in the back, and they had just white table rice sewn into bean bags. They were double sewn, so 2 layers so they wouldn't leak. And you put the bean bag filled with white table rice, the same stuff you eat that everyone has in their pantry. You put it in the microwave and it warms up because rice absorbs water from the atmosphere. So there's water in there. It warms up in the microwave. You stick it into the teddy bear in the pouch in the back, and it warms up, and hence it's called a Warm Buddy. Well, Health Canada was just totally going after this company, saying, you are putting Canadians at risk because white table rice is horribly dangerous. And I'm getting to the fun part about the health risk analysis. I'm ashamed as a Canadian that we would spend taxpayers' dollars on this. Well, I get a copy of the risk analysis done. So somebody in Health Canada getting paid more than you or I, I'm sure, with benefits and pension and the whole like. So this big risk PhD person does a risk analysis. And And I learned a lot, Bruce, because I learned actually that the real danger with white table rice, so notwithstanding it's double sowed, like it's got two layers, and Health Canada had no evidence of any time rice ever getting out. But in case it did, and I'm sure the company would have been glad to do three layers just to get Health Canada off their back. Apparently, white table rice, like the same stuff that you cook for your kids, um, like the exact same stuff, and notwithstanding you're throwing this in a microwave and heating it up, which clearly would kill things that might be in there. Um, Apparently, the white table rice that we eat that's in here could have insect eggs. And if somehow the rice got out and a toddler put a piece of the rice in their nose or in their ear, there could be an insect infestation in the child's nose or ear. And that is why, thank God, Health Canada, the Health Canada inspectors, the entire multi-billion-dollar machine had kicked into gear to protect our Canadian children from white table rice. I'm feeling patriotic here. So that was one of the funniest I ever saw. I couldn't believe it.
I I mean, it is humorous, but unfortunately, based on my experience, it's completely believable. I'm not sure where these health the rationale or the logic on these health hazard evaluations from on natural health products come from. They just don't really make any sense to me. They're just it's like a knee jerk reaction, and I mean, let's face it. The Health Canada does get a lot of money in user fees from the pharmaceutical industry. Does that affect their judgment in these health hazard evaluations? I don't know. I don't have proof it does. But it is safe to say that they do get a lot of money from that industry. But
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
do you think our natural health products are overregulated?
100%. Yeah,
Okay. Do you
100%.
want to do you want to share with us the problems?
Well, one of the problems I have is enforcement reliability. I mentioned about the taxes, but enforcement reliability and fairness to me is non-existent. Um, you know, it's insane. Um, they seem to focus on certain companies, but don't look at the overall picture. And I know in 1998, there was the Bader case that claimed
Mm-hmm.
that they were racist against David Bader as opposed to the Vancouver Chinatown community. And since then, they claim they're not racist. Um, but based on what I've seen, they they don't really think the Canadian market is outside their mailbox, if you can believe it. So, in other words, they claim that if they're moving in on one product, based on what I've seen, they claim if they're moving on one product, their job isn't to overlook the whole marketplace and see what's there and make a risk analysis of moving in on the one product. Their job is just to move in on that one product. And if you, Shawn, want to report other products, you go get them and mail them to them. They won't physically go out and look.
Yeah, and just to fill in, so people might not understand. So there was a Canadian human rights decision,
Yeah.
um, and the decision is called the Bader decision. So Health Canada's going after Bader, and the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal said, well, your enforcement is racist because you're requiring Bader to comply with these regulations that you say he should adhere to. But the entire, when we look at Chinatown in the Vancouver area, there's just basically no enforcement at all. You're allowing different cultural groups a different standard than you're applying to Bader. That's what that. I just wanted people to understand what you're referring to, Bruce. And as far as you know, that's still the case, right? That certain cultural groups are basically overlooked.
Based on my, based on my understanding, my opinion, my viewpoint, I believe that that still exists. So I believe, based on my experience, the health food stores and pharmacies are targeted for a different level of compliance than imports coming in from wherever, saying whatever they want, and these designated cultural communities. And what's really interesting as well is there was the drip and undrip decision regarding Indigenous rights. And we'll see where that takes us. More or less,
Mhm.
I was speaking very generally, very briefly to a constitutional lawyer that they were claiming that, and they didn't want to be quoted on this, so I'm not going to say who they were, but they were questioning whether or not Health Canada has jurisdiction over Indigenous people based on based on the drip and undrip um,
Mhm.
regulations.
And I'm not wanting to go there too much just because I kind of want to focus on our regulation of products, but I think it's important for people to understand what you're referring to with importation. So here in Canada, we've got these very strict and costly regulations that the Canadian natural health product manufacturers have to adhere to. But all of us are absolutely free, unless it's a controlled drug like cocaine or heroin or fentanyl or something, but we're perfectly free to import from other countries that are unregulated the exact same product. So my vitamin D in Canada is going to cost three or four times what vitamin D in the US costs. And so I can order it from the United States and pay less. And it's unregulated, and it kind of makes a mockery of the whole system because the Canadian manufacturers are having trouble competing. The Canadian health food stores, that no fault of theirs, but the manufacturing costs are higher, they're having trouble competing with online purchases because we can purchase the exact same thing in the United States unregulated. That's what you're talking about.
Yeah, I'm going to mention one thing when you say unregulated U.S. It's true in U.S. that they
Well,
have,
I mean less regulated. So,
yeah, they don't have pre-market approval of their products,
mm,
but generally speaking, I would say U.S. has good manufacturing standards on
mhm.
most of their facilities. So in
Yeah,
that
well,
way,
let's talk about that because I don't want to be alarmist. So, in Canada and the US, so let's go before our NHP regulations.
yep,
We've always, and nobody disagrees with this, we've always had protection against fraud. So don't
yep,
lie about what's in the bottle. Don't make claims that you don't say things that you can't substantiate. So both the product can't be fraudulent physically, what you say is there has to be there, and you can't make claims orally. So we all agree there should be protection against fraud. There can't be adulteration. Like that's been in our Food and Drug Act in the US forever. So you can't put in things that aren't there. And adulteration also means there can't be dangerous substances. And we all you also I think we all agree, well, in the Food and Drug Act there's always been requirements that you have to manufacture it with in a clean way. There can't everything's got to be sanitary, which is kind of almost like a legislative good manufacturing, and we had that before our regulations. And Bruce, I'd also say one thing that's changed with our regulations, meaning the NHP regulations, is we've had enforcement of good manufacturing practices. I don't know anyone. I disagree with how strict they are, and you probably disagree with how strict they've become and how arbitrary. But I don't know anyone who disagrees with let's have reasonable good manufacturing practices, which is really a follow up on the Food and Drug Act requirement that you do things in a sanitary and reasonable way.
yeah. On the GMP manufacturing, I think most people would be. I've done GMP audits before, and I've helped people get approved for GMP audits. And any of the audits that I've done have been accepted by Health Canada to get NHP licenses. And I think most people would be really surprised at the standards of the manufacturing in Canada. It's really, really high. And I think it's great that it's that high, actually, myself. The issue I have mostly is, okay, these guys have gone through a lot of effort, a lot of trouble to manufacture this product as per GMP, to make sure what's in the bottle is on the label. There's no adulteration, no contamination. But now they go to put it on the market, but there's some third world country making the product by third world manufacturing standards, adulterated and contaminated, and they can say more than the Canadian company does.
Mm-hmm.
My opinion, and this might sound radical to Health Canada, but I believe Canadian companies should have at least equal access to the Canadian market, particularly when their manufacturing is better than much of the world that is being mailed order to Canada. But that might sound radical to Health Canada. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I think we should just be back to the Food and Drug Act, fraud, adulteration, safe manufacturing practices. And just on the US side, so just the US manufacturers do have good manufacturing practices.
Yeah.
Under their regulations. So I don't want anyone thinking that we're suggesting they don't, because they do. But the difference is they don't need pre-market approval. So under their Dietary Supplements Health and Education Act of 1994, so they just have to give notice, 30-day notice to the FDA that they're going to be putting a product on the market. And here's the claim they're making, providing it's not a new dietary ingredient. And Bob's your uncle, they're fine. But they're classed as foods, Bruce, and there's a legal presumption that they're safe. And that's, wouldn't you agree that's a reasonable legal presumption? Like, you're not upset with the US law classing them as foods and presuming them by law to be safe.
I agree with it. And that is, to me, one of the biggest differences between the natural health product regulations and the US regulations. The US regulations, the dietary supplement regulations, were derived from, as you said, the Food Directorate. Ours were derived from the Drug Directorate. So my understanding is that provided they're made in US under the GMP standards, they are considered safe unless the FDA proves them dangerous. However, my understanding is if somebody imports or sends an export, if somebody is exporting to US from another country, it's flipped the other way. It can be considered dangerous until the company proves it's safe. That's my understanding. So in other words, the US is allowing their manufacturers at least equal access to their market, based on the fact that they manufacture products.
Arguably more than equal access, because the legal presumption for imports is that you have to prove them safe.
Yeah,
where they're presumed safe for US manufacturers.
That's right. In fact, I was working for one company where they had, they were manufacturing the product within Canada and they were shipping it to US. They woke up one morning and the US government said, we're not convinced it's safe. They talked to a US lawyer. He said, we'll just make it in US. They flipped their manufacturing to US, and now the FDA had to prove it was dangerous.
And in Canada, arguably, we do the opposite. So in Canada, our Canadian-made NHPs are presumed by law to be unsafe until you prove to Health Canada they're safe, which is part of our licensing.
Yeah.
But because you can import anything, the consumer can, without any proof of safety or efficacy, there's an implied presumption of safety for foreign products. So we've made it unfair for our manufacturers.
I completely agree. And you mentioned this before. When you say import, obviously you're not mentioning a controlled substance. You're mentioning a general NHP that is available over the counter. And I guess the question I have as well here regarding NHPs are a culture's access to its own traditional medicines a constitutional right or a privilege selectively granted to them by Health Canada?
Well, if you're asking me the question, I would say that's not a constitutional right, but it may be a right under a Canadian human rights legislation. But the issue is, so basically what Bruce is saying is let's say you're an indigenous community, or you're a tradition, you're a part of the Chinese community, and you got this tradition of traditional Chinese medicine, or in the case of indigenous community, your traditional indigenous medicine. Is that a constitutional right that you have? And I would say, just shooting from the cuff, it's not. But Bruce, we could let's just go with um, the non-ethnic. Well, but I mean, every community is ethnic. I mean, right now, Anglo-Saxon community we could call an ethnic community, but let's just broach us all into there together. I would say that it's just common sense that the human body needs nutrients to be healthy, and that if we deny the human body nutrients, it suffers, and it will suffer until you give it the nutrients that it needs to be healthy. And really, all the natural health products, by and large, are we're giving the human body the nutrients it needs so that it doesn't suffer. Isn't that just a basic human right? Don't we have the right to have the nutrients that our body needs? So on the one hand, we have Health Canada allowing chemicals in our food, and we're allowing basically agricultural practices where we can't get from our food the nutrients we need to be healthy. How can they possibly be putting us in a situation where we're going to lose vital nutrients? I mean, we don't even have to think of them as drugs. I mean, we're really talking about nutrients.
Yeah, I want to use an example here. I was visiting a Persian, a beautiful young Persian girl that was explaining to me traditionally what the Persians use saffron for. She was mentioning that her grandma lived to 116 years old, and she was explaining all these traditional uses they use saffron for. Now, the issue is this: saffron, it'd be very, very difficult to put saffron through a new drug submission to manage to prove all the claims she was saying. But does that mean her culture should be denied that information and the rights to use saffron for those, for what they traditionally use them for?
Does it mean you and I should be denied the right to hear what saffron can be used for?
Well,
Like,
exactly.
why limit it to the Persian community?
Well,
Like,
you're absolutely right. And if they are applying hypothetically for an NPN, one of the problems in these NPN applications is that the people reviewing them, and this is something I think we'll get to, in that I agree with the US structure function claims, and I agree with the regulatory structure of them in as far as market approval. To me, if somebody from the Persian community wants to import saffron, do proper GMP on it, and sell it for a structure function claim, I don't believe there should be some bureaucrat in Ottawa that has no idea about saffron and maybe can't even spell it, that should be reviewing that, because they're not really fulfilling any function in my viewpoint. She's the one with all the information on saffron, so why shouldn't she be able to express it? And
I think we could go further, Bruce, but let's just let people know what you mean by structure function claim, because even in the U.S. system, then they've instituted censorship. So, but I think we have to back up to our drug model itself. So we have a drug approval process for all drugs. Doesn't say chemical drugs, for all drugs. If you actually want to get, let's say, approval for a condition like depression, like actually this is a treatment for depression, so we've got antidepressants, they've got to go through this process anyone can look at the drug regs. It started at C.08.001, the new drug approval process. Bruce, that process is so expensive that my understanding is in our lifetime, in the lifetime of everyone on that could be watching this, the only drugs that have been approved to treat specific conditions are drugs that had a patent. And to have a patent, you have to be a synthetic chemical. So, but my understanding is you're aware of one drug that didn't have a patent that got through that process. But by and large, it's so expensive that you'll only go through if you have a patent. Can you explain why only patented drugs go through? Because it's not limited to drugs that have a patent. It's not limit. It's when you look at the regulations, it doesn't say you need to have a patent. But
No,
in
it
the
doesn't.
real
But
world, that's the reality. It might as well say that.
well, what you're claiming is quite correct. However, I'm going to do one slight alteration to what you're claiming, and that's saying that you have to have very strong intellectual property on the drug. And the overwhelming majority of the time, that's a patent. And what happens is that to go through the new drug process, and if anybody wants to know the specific steps to go through a new drug process, I believe online right now, my testimony for the True Hope trial is still there, where I explain specifically step by step how to go through the new drug process, or why a depression drug couldn't go through that process. But there has to be an engine.
Meaning a natural depression drug that wasn't a synthetic chemical.
That's right. In order to go through there has to be a lot of intellectual property on the drug, because it takes a lot of money to go through the process. And obviously the people investing the money want the money back plus more. So they're not going to, for example, invest in peppermint. Even though peppermint, I think, is probably one of the most proven compounds or proven drugs on the market. They won't invest in that because there's no real intellectual property, I think, within peppermint. So you need a lot of money to go through the process. And the reason I'm saying a lot of money with outcoming numbers is because depending on the clinical endpoint depends on how much money. I can say it's lots and lots, but for example, if I had a pill to raise people from the dead, this is a very clear clinical endpoint. And to get IRB approval to do the trial is going to be very cheap to do. So something that clear is going to be really simple. If I have something that hypothetically prevents cancer, that is going to be a fortune, because the clinical endpoint is not that clear, and we'd have to do an epidemiological study with a biostatistician somewhere in the world. Go ahead.
Also clarify, not even cure cancer, but if you had a drug to treat cancer, that's going to be expensive, because treat doesn't mean cure, but it means better clinical outcomes defined in a specific way, right? And that's not a clear endpoint. Whereas,
it's a very, very expensive project. That's very, unless you have the intellectual property protection to keep everybody else off the market, and only sell your product, it's a tough game to go through. Now, go ahead.
Well, I just want to make sure that people understand what you're saying. You know, like at the True Hope trial, at the federal court one, you know, I appreciate you can do this for maybe hundreds of millions on a simple application, but on a complicated application, the application fee to Health Canada alone is $250,000.
At least.
So I mean, so just so that people understand, like on a complicated application, you pay Health Canada $250,000 at least to even go through your application. So it's not that you can't go through it for hundreds of millions, for example. But, you know, I think at the True Hope trial, and you had recently, you know, read about it, I mean, the average cost was $1 billion, but it doesn't mean it costs you that. But it costs you so much That, like, so just imagine, you know, the audience, we in the audience, we're on the board of a company, and we have a natural product that will cure cancer. Like, oh my gosh, this is going to be a wonderful thing. Well, we'll never raise the money to run, you know, the animal studies, the animal safety studies, the life death 50 studies, the, the preliminary human studies to test safety extrapolated on the animal data, and then the sizable double blind clinical trials. And we'd need fairly large numbers to say we cure cancer. We're never going to raise the money necessary to do that, because we'll never get our money back. An investor would say, well, as soon as you get market approval, because we don't have a patent, anyone without having to run these studies can now make the product, and there's nothing. So we wouldn't be able to charge enough to get
Yeah.
our money back. And I use Viagra as an example, like of how a patent protects you. So Viagra was the first erectile dysfunction drug, and Pfizer had the patent. So they get through this process. Well, they have monopolies. Like, a patent just means you have a monopoly for the year of life of a patent, and a drug patent in Canada lasts for 25 years. So when Pfizer got approved, no one could compete with them. They had a monopoly, and they could charge whatever they wanted, and they charged a lot. But then when the patent ran out, anyone can make sildenafil. That's the generic word, for the drug that Viagra is, and the price drops. So a natural product, even if you cured cancer, if you erectile dysfunction, if your heart, it doesn't matter. You'll never go through the process because you'll never spend your own money, and you'll never raise the money because you don't have a monopoly. That's what we're talking about, right, Bruce?
It is the one part that I'm unsure, or I might want to comment on, is that my understanding is that Viagra can set their own price on the U.S. market, but in Canada, they don't set their own price. The Canadian government sets the price on prescription drugs. That's my understanding. But either way, you're absolutely correct on the rest, in the fact that it's a very, very high markup for these companies, and there's no competition. Whereas, using the example of peppermint again, if somebody spent $1 billion going through some intricate application on peppermint, there's no way they'd get their money back.
Because anyone can sell peppermint.
Yeah, they'd say,
and they could sell with your approval claim. So if you approve peppermint to treat erectile dysfunction, anyone could sell it for that once you've got the claim approved.
Well, my understanding is that if I get the claim approved for my peppermint for erectile dysfunction, there might be technically some sort of protection on that claim for a while, possibly. But who cares? Well, the pharmacist or the health food store owner says, why would you buy that for $100 a capsule? Just go over there and buy that one for $1. It's the same thing.
It's the same thing. Yep.
So even if I have label protection, it doesn't really help anyway. I will never get my money back. And based on my experience, I've worked with a lot of traditional medicines over time. And there's 3 different paradigms or metaphors to explain how these medicines work. One is the chemistry metaphor, as we've talked about, and as is used for allopathic drugs in Western herbology. Another one is the electrochemistry metaphor, which is used for chiropractic, Chinese medicine, and Ayurvedic, where they talk about meridians combined with chemistry. And the third one is the shamanic metaphor, which is, it's more esoterical in a way, but at the same time, there's more and more evidence that quantum physics seems to agree with almost the shamanic metaphor. So as soon as you think it's all quackery or crazy, quantum physics seems to, agree with it. Quarks coming from the earth and the sun having pure energy. The reason I'm mentioning this is I cannot see how the shamanic or electrochemistry metaphors could possibly go through anything like a new drug submission. It's based on strictly a chemistry metaphor.
Right. So we're
And
basically excluding other traditions that
yes,
could be real because of the way we've structured it.
well, the question is, how much do we know about of how the body works?
Hmm.
Nobody can agree on this. I would say that we know probably 10% best.
Can I
So,
give you a funny story that just, well, it's not funny, but it's just, homeopathic medicine.
yeah.
Arguably, it doesn't make sense, right? Like, arguably, it doesn't make sense. So just so people understand, is the idea of homeopathic medicine is that basically you give the body like a minute amount of actually the problem, right? So you're not trying to treat the symptoms, but if there's a problem, so like you got an allergy, well, we'll actually give you an allergen, but in such a minute quality or quantity that you may not even be able to measure it, and they
Mhm.
just keep diluting and diluting, but there's this shaking that's part of it. So you could have a homeopathic remedy, Bruce, where arguably in theory there's nothing there. Now, I'm interviewing yesterday Dr. Michelle Perro, who is a basically like a pediatrician emergency doctor. Like, she's a medical doctor that's like 45 years. She's trained at Yale Medical School and, Mount Sinai. She's working at the big children's hospital in New York City in the emergency ward. And then she moves to California. She's doing that. She's been practicing for a long time. And now she's got kids, and she's got this young boy who's really suffering with croup, and it just keeps coming back and real trouble breathing. Well, she's a pediatrician expert. Her husband's a pediatrician expert. She doesn't want to put her boy on the steroids. And she has some medical doctor acquaintance who's also a homeopath say, use this. And within 5 minutes, the croupy cough breathing was like, it's inexplainable. It's repeatable. Both her and her pediatric doctor, like she says, you can't get your head around it. And I had another physician, 40 years as a medical doctor, but the last 25 also as a homeopath. And he says, you can't get around how fast this homeopathic works. Well, Bruce, it can't be chemical. What's going on?
I can't explain homeopathy. My background's in chemistry, but what I will say is, on a new drug submission, you do not have to explain mechanism of action. So my comment is, if it works, it works. And the drugs that go through new drug submissions, they don't have to explain mechanism of action. So if it works, it works. That's what I'd say.
Mm-hmm.
It's if it's therapeutically effective, it's therapeutically effective.
So
Yeah. One of the issues, or one of the concerns I have too, is I have a number of medical doctor friends that I have sort of personal conversations with, and I consider them as colleagues as well as friends, and they say things to me that they won't say within the medical office. That's the reason I won't mention any of them. But one of their concerns is that they have concern that when they prescribe natural health products, that they will be targeted by the medical association. And certainly a constitutional lawyer I talked to the other day, he was saying the same thing, is that he's concerned there's more targeting of medical physicians that are open-minded towards these therapeutic remedies.
it seems the noose is tightening. And what's interesting, Bruce, to me is also the censorship. So, and that's why I disagree with the limitation to structure function claims in the US, but let's just stick in Canada. So in Canada, um, even though the natural health product regulations don't say you can't be approved to cure anything or to treat anything, from a policy perspective, we kind of have the worst of both worlds. So we have to be pre-licensed, and the policy is to limit us to structure function claims anyway.
I completely agree. Yeah.
So, and what a structure function claim is. So I'll use True Hope as an example because you're very familiar with them from having to be involved in a court case. Not that you were charged; you were an expert. Just so everyone knows. No,
Thanks
no,
for
it's not that
clarifying. Yeah.
Bruce. No, Bruce wasn't involved in the court case himself. He was brought in as a drug approval expert. So, but here, there are. My understanding is that there are 30 peer-reviewed published journal articles on EM Power Plus, all funded by governments around the world. So, I live in Alberta, and the Alberta government coughed up like $500,000 like 35 years ago when that was a meaningful amount of money for a double-blind clinical trial being run by the Behavioral Research Unit at Children's Hospital. Now, those people, their wages were already being paid. So, I mean, $500,000 even meant more other than, if you had hired another company that had to make profit. There was no profit need here, and everyone's salaries are already being paid. So governments around the world have decided to fund significant research on a natural health product, and the company can't share that. And practitioners can't share that because Health Canada will shut them down. What do what do you think about? Well, first of all, like, I mean, you do understand, like, companies and practitioners, they're only allowed to basically say the label claim, which I think for True Hope is something like supports mental health and well-being. Do you want to discuss that? Like, what? First of
Insanity.
all,
It's insanity in that what happens, in my viewpoint, is that, put it this way to you, I knew one company, it was a fairly large company, I knew this person from a fairly large company. She put 3 applications into Health Canada for the exact same product, exact same ingredients, exact same claim, exact same product.
but the
She got,
application's in from 3 different companies. So,
yeah. So Health Canada didn't know it was the same product behind their own screens. And she got 3 completely different IRNs. So
and
in other words,
and
Health
explain what
Canada,
an IRN is so people understand what's happening here.
well, it's a notice wanting more information regarding an application. So in other words, she sent in the exact same product. 3 different reviewers looked at the product,
Exact
and they
same application.
3 different reviewers looked at the product and were requesting 3 different things. So this is the consistency of Health Canada within their review process. And that's the reason that I think we should go to the same um, the same policy of US of, as you were saying, no, basically no pre-market approval. In other words, we can put it on the market provided we notify within a specific space and time. Because these reviews are a waste of money to me, in that they're not being done consistently at all. And they're just a bunch of red tape going back and forth continually. They're not adding
Well,
value to the product at all.
so Bruce, so for both chemical drugs and natural health products, I mean, do you have any faith in the approval process? Like, the public just assumes if Health Canada has in theory approved something, it means it's safe and effective. And I'm just wondering if you share the public's confidence.
I not as I'm not as confident as what you're saying. I'm not convinced specifically in natural health products that their review process is accurate. In new drugs, as I said, most of the information, like it or not, comes from post-market surveillance. And in fact, a lot of the time, after thalidomide, Health Canada, their strategy has been to let the drug go onto the US market for a couple of years, see what happens, and then allow it on the Canadian market. Because they did allow thalidomide on the Canadian market, and obviously it was a disastrous situation.
Right, and the US didn't, so they're kind of wanting to reverse that one.
Exactly. So I think the reviewers are thinking, okay, we'll delay the process a little bit from putting it on the Canadian market. That way we can see what happens on the American market. But I'm not sure if the drug companies really mind. The reason I say they don't mind is that the US patents, from my understanding, on these drugs are stronger than the Canadian ones and longer. So if
Mm.
it takes a little longer to get on the Canadian market, they can hold the US patent a little bit longer. And obviously, there is concern within the US of ordering therapeutic drugs from Canada that are lower cost than in US. And from my understanding, it's caused by two things. One is the patent situation. The patents there are allowed longer. And the other situation is that Health Canada sets the price, I believe, for the drugs within Canada, or possibly its provincial government. I
Yeah,
think that
I think because I think the way it works, Bruce, is they may when they're buying it, but I think it's usually done provincially, except during COVID. I think it was done nationally. But I mean, a company doesn't have to agree to sell, right? So a
yeah,
company may agree to a price, but they don't have to agree to sell. And I know with Viagra, like there were mainstream news stories about how much um, Pfizer was charging, but it wasn't included in any provincial. It wasn't included under the Canada Health Act as a requirement, so it wasn't an essential drug. Can I ask you? You probably read Dr. Shiv Chopra's book "Corrupt to the Core" long ago.
I haven't.
Oh, okay. Well, you need to. It's a fun book, but Dr. Shiv Chopra was a drug approval scientist at Health Canada for 30 years, and in the book, he discusses. He actually, if I recall correctly, quotes a CBC story where Dr. Chopra wasn't the only drug approval scientist forced to testify at the Senate about corruption in the drug approval process. Dr. Margaret Hayden also had to testify, and the CBC reports, as she explained to them, and that as a drug approval scientist, so this is Dr. Margaret Hayden, as reported by the CBC, that as a drug approval scientist at Health Canada, after a period of time, you come to understand how, when you recommend a drug shouldn't be approved, so you work for Health Canada, you're a drug approval scientist, you're assessing whether a drug should be approved, and you recommend it shouldn't. She said, well, after a while, you understand how senior management's going to get around your decision. And as a lawyer, I think it's brilliant because there's no liability, right? So apparently, as she explains, what the senior management does is they appoint a panel of outside experts, and then so we've got plural happening. The outside experts as a group, so you don't know who's saying yay or nay, the outside experts as a group recommend approval of the drug. So there's no liability there. And then senior management, who aren't experts, say, well, we're going to rely on this panel of experts. So there's no liability on senior management. That's what do you think about that as this, an effective way to protect Canadians and get drugs on the market?
Well, to me, it's like stacking the deck, really. In other words, what do they do if that committee doesn't approve? They just go to another one.
Yeah, it's really. I mean, I'm being tongue in cheek because I don't know about you, but I'm just so frustrated. I was sharing with you the other day what happened to me during a Health Canada trial where I'm having to cross-examine for days a Health Canada, a hired gun, right? I remember I was telling you this story. So this fellow just ran a company that got psychiatric drugs through this new drug approval process, and actually starts complaining to me at how hard it is to get new antidepressants approved because, as he explains, rightfully so, that, well, he's got to give Health Canada two, we'll call them sizable. I appreciate you made the point. Really, the numbers aren't very large for most of these trials. Like
Mm-hmm.
they're not really robust for drawing conclusions. But he's got to give Health Canada two, reasonably sized double-blind clinical trials showing the drug works, which means there's a statistical separation between the drug and the sugar pill, for a very short period of time on, as tenuous markers as we can, with an extremely healthy subset of volunteers, so that the safety signals aren't big. I mean, that's how it works. So he's got to provide these to Health Canada. But what shocked me is he said, and this is what he does for a living, he says, well, right out of the gate, I run eight double-blind clinical trials because I need 8 to get the 2 that show this statistical separation between the drug and the sugar pill. Now, he doesn't give Health Canada those other 6. And those other 6, I mean, they might be inconclusive, some of them. Some of them might show the sugar pill works better than the drug. Some of them might show the drug works better than the sugar pill, but they don't like the safety signals. And these trials are already designed to get the result. Like, people write books, like, Angie Marcel of the New England Journal of Medicine. They write books on how there's so much gaming in the design that they're meaningless anyway. I think, and I'm getting to my question, I think the law should be, instead of this censorship where you can only say what the label claim is. So when he gets the drug approved as an antidepressant, all the company's allowed to say is that it's an antidepressant. The company actually can't legally share the failed double-blind clinical trials unless they're published in a journal. The company can't legally share with the public, not that they would anyway, they're trying to make money, but it's actually illegal for the company to share the failed clinical trials with us, let alone the successful ones, again, unless they're published in a journal, a peer-reviewed journal. And then that's allowed. So I think, Bruce, and I'm curious about your comments, I think whether it's a natural drug, whether it's chemical, that the law should be, no, you're not restricted to the label claim. You actually legally have to share all the information you have with us. Go back to a Clint Eastwood movie, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. What do you think?
Well, I would fully agree with that. There's no question that they should have to share everything. And I would go on further to say that one of the things about these clinical trials too is, and I'm not trying to knock them, I do admire, I've been in strategic boardrooms with pharmaceutical companies before and seen how they strategize for these products for passing clinical trials and getting expanded claims on their labels. And they're very, very, very clever. I give them credit for that. The thing is, when these things are approved, one, they should have to show that. But one of the disadvantages of these drugs when they first go on the market again is there's only usually a certain subset of people that are in these trials. So, for example, if there's an antidepressant drug that usually they're European males because the fact that they have the most money, that's what they usually have in most of the trials. But if there's a European male from Germany that's finding some sort of therapeutic effect from an antidepressant drug for the first 6 weeks that they're on the drug, it doesn't mean that a pregnant African woman taking the drug for 6 months will get the same effect or the same positive outcomes over that period of time. It's kind of like apples and oranges. That's the reason I mentioned as well that really they heavily rely on post-market surveillance to see really what happens on this stuff. But yeah, I fully agree. They should have to disclose everything regarding the clinical trials.
Yeah, and I just, what I like about conversations with you is you make me think. The way they design clinical trials, so really, they're not used for the same purpose. Really calls into question the censorship issue too. So, for example, if like most drugs are used off-label use, just back to this depression thing, if you and I are going to run a clinical trial on depression, so we're gonna have the European, male.
Yep.
They're going to be young.
Probably.
Because we don't want safety signals. We're going to run it for a short period of time. Like most psychiatric drugs, the clinical trial, like it's shorter than 2 months.
Hmm.
And yet the doctor's going to prescribe it and say it's not going to work for 2 or 3 months. Well, it's not approved for that, right? Like none of the psychiatric drugs are approved long term because they've never been studied long term. Like almost all of our drug use has nothing to do with the clinical trial approvals. It's off-label use. And yet we're limited. I've just made a note. This is a new thing, a new realization. And yet we're limited to our speech of claiming whatever flows from the clinical trial approval. That's
Yeah.
interesting.
One comment here too. This is one of the reasons I thoroughly enjoy conversations with you too, Shawn. It's really expands my mind into thinking of this stuff. Um, but yeah, you're correct. And what happens is they have the off-label use for this, but the pharmaceutical companies, again, they go by post-market surveillance. They're very, 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 very good at putting questions together for doctors on post-market surveillance to keep the drug on the market and find ways to expand the claim. Okay, an example is if I had, suppose I have a face cream and I wanted the therapeutic claim for acne. I have the face cream for just generally a moisturizer. That's what I'm having it for. But I tell medical doctors, hey, it's good for acne too. And then what I do is I get them to take pictures and monitor it for acne. This is the sort of strategy sometimes they use. I'm using a wild example there. There is a line between a clinical trial and post-market surveillance, and they're very strategic at balancing that line to know where they're just doing post-market surveillance and where they're doing a clinical trial. And then they take the post-market surveillance and they take all these doctors post-market surveillance, maybe get some case studies, then go to Health Canada and say, we want a clinical trial on something. And by the way, the natural health product companies could have that same strategy if they chose, provided they know how to dance around the post-market surveillance and clinical trial strategy. That is one option for them. But your thinking is quite correct. Why aren't they allowed, if there's centuries of use of these products, why aren't they allowed to make these expanded claims anyway? It makes no sense.
Mm-hmm.
Provided
Well,
what
I like to use ginger tea as an example because, you know, like, has it been 3,000 years we've been using it to help treat nausea?
yeah,
And yet, likely, like, so why can't we just continue to use ginger tea to treat nausea? Why can't we share that information? Why can't we just be truthful and say, yeah, there haven't been any double-blind clinical trials to treat nausea? Well, okay, but why can't we just continue to use it for that? And I bet you, Bruce, that nobody has ginger tea approved to treat nausea, that it's some structure function claim, supports digestive health, if anyone's even bothered to do that, because you can just buy ginger tea in the tea aisle. You can't share with people truthful health information about it.
exactly. I mean, what's truthful is it's traditionally used to treat nausea.
Mm-hmm.
I'd have to check on the claims for ginger tea, but
Yeah, and I haven't either. I'm just
but
speculating. I
you're
doubt it,
you're
right?
you're quite correct. These natural health products are restricted in expressing what they're traditionally used for. And I bet when my Persian friend was explaining to me about saffron, it's the same thing. What she was explaining, I'm sure, was not on the labels.
No, I want to segue because you license your company, you license natural health products. And and I'm happy to see if there's any manufacturers out there. Like Bruce's like, I hire him for court things because he knows what he's talking about. So, there I go, plug you, Bruce. But my question is, so this self-care framework that Health Canada first introduced in 2017, and then they tour the country in 2018. one of the branches, it hasn't been instituted yet, but they kind of have like about 5 or 6 things they said they would do, and they've marched through most of them, but we still have cost recovery, which we haven't talked about. But another part of it was is they said, hey, the last thing we're going to do is we're going to come out with a new set of regulations. So we're going to harmonize all over-the-counter drugs, so the chemical over-the-counter drugs and the natural health products, but we're not going to license for any condition for which that it's not truly self-care. So, and they define self-care as it resolves within 60 days and you wouldn't need advice from a healthcare practitioner, which is interesting. Then we have to license through the new drug approval process. But what I wanted to ask you about is they said, we're no longer going to allow traditional use to justify efficacy. We're going to limit traditional use to justify safety in some conditions. What do you think the effect would be on the types of products that we would have left if we can't use traditional use evidence to produce efficacy? Because I honestly don't know what percentage of products are out there that are licensed based on traditional use.
I think most of them are licensed on traditional use.
I suspected that. So can you explain what that means? Like what that means for licensing? Because Canadians don't understand. Well, we have to prove a product. So when we get licensed, we have to prove a product works, and which is what it means by efficacy. Now, you could run, clinical trials to do that, but we're allowed to use traditional use evidence, right?
That's correct. Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah.
And what that basically means is that if you have pharmacopoeias, or if you can prove traditional use from certain cultures, used for certain conditions, you're allowed to get a product license based on that. That's basically the long and the short of traditional use. And to me, it's complete insanity not allowing traditional use on a drug application. It's complete insanity.
Well, I have to say I enjoy their marketing because we're dealing with clever people. Because the rationale is let's say you have a headache and you go to the pharmacy or your health, let's just say pharmacy. And remember, we're limited to self-care, so we're going to get rid of all products for which you would seek the advice of a healthcare practitioner. But you have a headache and you've got aspirin sitting on the shelf, the chemical drug synthesized from white willow bark.
Yep.
And you have white willow bark sitting on the shelf. Well, they're both for headaches. But one, because it's a chemical drug, has all these strict regulations and site license requirements and all of this that the other doesn't. White willow bark doesn't. And this is just their argument. It's brilliant. I mean, I feel convinced, except I know it's wrong. Why shouldn't the consumer doesn't know there's different regulatory environments. They're both beside each other on the shelf because they're on the headache aisle. And this isn't fair to the consumer.
I'm going to bring up one topic I've said several times here, and I'm going to say it again, but let me finish with it. And that is the majority of the information on a drug is gotten through post-market surveillance. So even after the application goes through, then what happens is there's post-market surveillance because the clinical trials are usually small. Most of the information is gotten through post-market surveillance. And when they say they don't allow traditional use, isn't traditional use post-market surveillance done by tradition, by cultures over time? So we're actually getting the same information over a long period of time by more people, not all physicians. But we're getting post-market surveillance. That's what traditional use is. So they have most of their information from post-market surveillance, but so do traditional medicines.
Mm-hmm.
The difference is it's formatted differently, and granted, on traditional medicines, it's not always the shaman of the village that provides the information. A lot of the time it is, but it's not always. So peppermint has thousands of years of post-market surveillance from millions of people. A lot of these drugs new on the market don't have as much post-market surveillance, but it's strictly from physicians. But it's still post-market surveillance.
Hmm.
So I'm confused at why they would not allow traditional use, because they're allowing the same thing in post-market surveillance, really.
That is a wonderful observation.
Oh, thank you.
So, no, I mean, that's brilliant, because I've never thought of it that way. But of course, that's what traditional use evidence is.
Yeah. So it's insane that they wouldn't allow it. And it's also insane that they would not have. Well, I agree with you. I think these reviews of these natural health products by Health Canada are simply ridiculous, because they're not consistent at all. I used an example of 3 applications of the exact same product coming out with 3 different IRNs. But it's also well known in the industry. If you don't get approved one time, just send it in again. You'll get a different review, or just keep sending it in. Well, this is not adding value to the market. The US system of not having pre-market review, to me, is far more efficient, and it cuts down on the cost of these. And US, again, we're not talking about the manufacturing standard. I completely agree with the manufacturing standard being very stringent, making sure what's in the bottle is in the label. It's just that playing, games of sending applications back and forth don't really make sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
As far as my company goes, yeah, we do drug applications, but probably the specialty we have is that if there is a product on the market right now that a company wants to expand into a better version of the product. When I'm saying that, not necessarily formula, but have more GMP status on the product and more claims on the product, we tend to be very good at taking what I would say is winner products and making them better. We do applications too, but what's unique to us is that we know a lot of the regulations and a lot of the standards to improve on the products already there.
What do you think about I get frustrated, like, when Health Canada is wanting ever stricter regulation on natural health products. They go risk, risk, risk. But they don't look at the benefits. And it just seems to me that if the goal is good health outcomes, then, well, you have to look at the benefits. Like, isn't the risk taking away products that are providing us health benefits? And I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I would completely agree with you. But what's inconsistent with Health Canada is, again, some of the people there don't look at traditional use as reliable information. So they look at a risk and say, hey, look, that's a risk. We have a chemical drug here that's just gone through a new drug approval process. We know it's therapeutic. We know that for a fact because it went through 2 double-blind clinical trials. It went through the efficacy. It went through the safety, biochemistry, and that. And plus, it paid us a lot of money. We know that's safe. And this natural health product over here, okay, it's safe. People have taken it forever. But, this traditional use, we don't believe in the traditional use. So we're just going to say it's gone. It's unsafe. We'll stick with the chemical drug. I don't agree with that, but I do see it happening there. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And in the meantime, the chemical drug, a lot of the time, I'm hopefully I'm not knocking the chemical drugs. There's a lot of very therapeutic chemical drugs that have been very therapeutic over time that have helped people. And I'm certainly not trying to knock them, but I am saying that I have witnessed at times Health Canada discriminating against natural health products and favoring those by my thinking.
Right, meaning
But
that Health Canada is unfairly attacking natural health products and doesn't seem to apply the same vigor in enforcement and attention to the chemical drugs.
exactly,
What do you think of
exactly.
the quality of Health Canada personnel? You've alluded to, you know, on the kind of application process, so they're trying to get their approval. Um, that there's pretty low quality there when, the same application, three different things are being asked for, meaning, the two things, are fine and the third thing isn't. And then you can say that for each one. What about on the enforcement end?
Well, I would say on the application process, at very, very least, there's extreme inconsistency. I think that when people are making drug applications in, they shouldn't be thinking that they're sending it, they're at a crap table in Vegas. Okay, depending on the reviewer, depending on what they get back, it shouldn't be like that. And as far as you were asking me about the inspectors, I think they're inconsistent as well. And I'm certainly not saying they're bad people. A lot of them I met are good people and they're well intentioned. But I have not found that there's consistent training in them as well or consistent enforcement in them as well. And the to me, the on a lot of these products, if you want 6 different answers from Health Canada, all you have to do is ask 5 different people. That's my experience. There's complete inconsistency, and I'm not sure whether or not they're not training them well. I'm not saying they're not good people. I think there are good people, but there just seems to be extreme inconsistency based on what I've said, what I've seen.
Mm-hmm.
And I know there's all sorts of intricate conspiracies, that are claimed against these field inspectors and that. And based on what I've seen, I would be actually impressed if Health Canada was capable of half the conspiracies, like intricate conspiracies involving everybody that they've been accused of, because all I've seen is complete confusion. One inspector
Which
and
is
one,
which is arguably more of a problem than if there was some cohesion to for some nefarious purpose.
yeah, it's kind of like if people were on a giant ship. The insinuation is there a conspiracy, everybody's pointing in the same direction. My experience is, with these field inspectors and going up within them, everybody's pointing in a different direction.
You're raising something interesting, and there's this nature of paradox that if you try too hard to do something, in this case it would be regulate natural health products, that actually you end up being able to regulate them less. And one thing that's possible, Bruce, is just that the marketplace is so big and so vast that if you try to overdo it, you're basically going to get no compliance and everyone going underground and the Wild West because they can't comply. Whereas if you just said, listen, I'm going to limit myself to fraud, adulteration, and good manufacturing practices, that likely you would get really good compliance and better outcomes. Do you have any thoughts on that? Because things really are complicated out there.
I completely agree with you. I think if they just simplified it, I have empathy for a lot of the companies out there because I think a lot of them are well-meaning, wanting to comply, but it's walking through these regulations and different field inspectors coming in with different thoughts and different policies, and IRNs coming up back with different numbers and their requests in that. To me, I think for some of these companies, Canadian companies, it's like a minefield. They don't know what's going to blow up next. So I
Mm-hmm.
feel empathy for them. It's insane. I think part of the issue too is that Health Canada may be having trouble retaining good people as well. In that, if there is a lot of the time, I think if there is a really competent and good field inspector, if they don't get promoted within Health Canada themselves, they're going to be basically scooped up by the pharmaceutical industry. that'll get a call one day offered twice the salary
Mm-hmm.
because they
Right.
know what they're doing and they're really good at what they do. So
Yeah.
there could be a problem with them trying to maintain manpower.
Bruce, we're running long here, but I just wanted I wanted to ask you about you shared with me kind of a well, I thought it was a funny story where when you're working at Flora, Health Canada actually billed you for having to deal with a complaint. Can you just kind of quickly share
Oh,
with us that story? I just thought it was quite funny, actually.
well, what was happening was that uh, I forget the specific department within Health Canada, but they actually, I'm not going to share that because I haven't got
Okay, yeah.
authorization
So we
to.
so we won't share that. So we'll just end with this then. I ask
I
everyone
can
who.
share another story
Okay,
though.
yeah. I don't want to. Okay, I do want to get you into trouble. No, I'm just kidding. Um,
Actually, yeah, I can share with
but
another story, and that is that um, what happens is that, as I said, Health Canada, they have a tendency only to look at what's coming in the mail. They will not get off their duff and actually look what's on the market. And I actually phoned the minister's office a number of times complaining about this, saying they're not uniform enforcing. I don't believe that the Canadian market is in their office, what's coming in the mail. I think they should get out and uniformly enforce. Okay. And I complained a number of times to the minister's office on that. Minister's office didn't actually do anything. What they did, though, is they got their security guard to phone me and tell me not to bother them so much, if you can believe it.
that is a funny story. Bruce,
And
just really quickly, do you have a final message to Ottawa? Because I like
well,
to ask people.
what I was just to finish this, I got to finish this though. What happened was that I told the security officer that I believe that he's violating my constitutional right of free speech. And then he started to freak out. It was just bizarre. But yeah,
So
in as far as
maybe you shouldn't answer the question, what's your message for Ottawa? Because you've been told by the security person not to
yeah,
speak.
maybe yeah.
So,
What I would say for Ottawa is that they've got to be um, use far more common sense and in as far as natural health product regulations, and obviously allow traditional claims. Traditional claims, I think, are a human right. That's my opinion. That's my thinking. And to sum it up, too, it's been a tremendous pleasure talking to you, Shawn. And you believe that your charter will help with the issues that we've mentioned here, right?
oh, I totally do, Bruce. Is so, you know, the first thing the charter does, because the charter is quite simple. So the first thing it does is it takes health rights that the courts already say we have, and it just codifies them. It says these are the rights, and it requires all federal government departments to basically adhere in their interactions with us with these rights. You know, if you have to go to court and basically try to get a right enforced, you're going to spend $10,000 just having your lawyer research the case law and arguing and going through case after case with the judge. The judge will agree with you, but why do you have to go through that process? You know, and when you read them, nobody's going to disagree with those rights. So let's codify them, let's simplify it. And when you go to court, say, like, let's say we'll use Regina versus Parker as an example. It was one of the marijuana cases. He's got he's suffering terribly under the chemical drugs. He finds relief, but when he goes to court, or when anyone goes to court where Health Canada or the government is saying, no, we don't want you to treat yourself with this, the Department of Justice actually hires experts to say, no, there's these chemical drugs. Here's all the research, they work. Parker's just full of crap when he says they don't. And there aren't clinical trials on what he says is working for him. And some people lose. Like, I mean, even if you have the resources to get through all of that. And so we put a presumption in there, the best source of information as to whether a treatment works for a person is the person. Who knew, right? So, and it moves the regulation of natural health products out of Health Canada's hand, and it creates a legal presumption to have a balanced risk analysis. So in the United States, the FDA can't remove a product unless there's evidence of harm. Well, under the charter, you actually have to look, what are the benefits? What are the risks? How do we get the best health outcomes? And that's what you do. It's common sense. It's crazy that we even have to put it in an act. But Bruce, thank you for asking the question. I think it'd make a world of difference.
Yeah, and my understanding is the Constitution takes precedence over the Act and the regulations, and this comes just under the Constitution. So
Yeah.
this will take precedence over the Act and the regulations. And the final thing I'd probably say is that there's probably a lot of, I know there's a lot of people that genuinely want to help the natural health product industry, and I would say put your efforts out where it's going to pay off most. So, and I think one of the efforts that doesn't pay off is phoning Health Canada's reception and yelling at them. Okay, that doesn't really help. I think Shawn is extremely intelligent lawyer that's on our side. So I trust his advice in giving information on doing what helps best. And according to you, Shawn, providing or supporting this charter that you're suggesting is going to help pass, correct?
Yeah, and thanks, Bruce.
Okay.
We've got to cut her off here. So,
Okay.
on behalf of the Natural Health Product Protection Association, on behalf of the World's Greatest Health Show, I have to tell you, I've totally enjoyed this conversation.
So have I.
And thank you so much for coming and sharing with us.
Thank you for having me, Shawn.